365 Days, the sweet love story of two female inmates. The first time Mara noticed her, it was raining inside the prison. Not real rain, but the kind of invisible downpour that soaks into your bones. When the fluorescent lights flicker at 3 a.m. and the woman in the cell across the corridor is crying so quietly that you have to hold your breath just to hear it. Mara had been inside Westbrook, women's correctional facility, for 212 days by then, and she had learned to sleep through screaming, through metal clanging against metal, through the particular hollow sound that a human being makes when hope finally leaves their body. But she could not sleep through that crying. Something about its softness broke her open in a way that 212 days of hardness had failed to do. The woman's name was Delilah. She had arrived on a Tuesday in November, transferred from another facility 3 states away, carrying nothing but a single photograph, pressed between her palm and the waistband of her prison-issued pants, a photograph of a little girl with 2 missing front teeth and a laugh so wide it seemed to reach the edges of the image itself. Delilah was 31 years old, convicted of a crime born out of desperation rather than cruelty, and she wore her guilt like a second uniform, always present, always visible, always heavier than anything the state could make her carry. She had a way of looking at the walls as though she was memorizing their texture, as though she was already planning how to describe this place to someone she loved when she finally got out. Mara, on the other hand, had stopped looking at the walls a long time ago. She was 34, sharp-jawed, with hands that had once been used to build furniture in a small woodworking shop she ran herself. Those same hands had made one terrible decision on a night when grief and exhaustion collapsed into each other, and now those hands picked up meal trays and folded laundry, and held nothing that mattered. She had shut herself down the way you shut a house when the family moves away. Boards over the windows, locks on the doors, nothing left inside that could be taken. She had become very good at existing without actually living, which in a place like Westbrook was almost considered a survival skill. The two women first spoke on a Thursday morning during yard time, when the November sky looked like a sheet of hammered pewter and most of the other inmates clustered near the wall for warmth. Delilah was sitting alone on the concrete bench, near the dead garden, a small rectangle of soil where someone had once tried to grow something green, and she was writing in the margins of a library book with a stubby pencil. Mara sat down not because she wanted company, but because every other surface was occupied, and what happened next was so ordinary that it almost disguised itself as nothing. Delilah looked up, didn't perform a smile, didn't offer pleasantries, just looked at Mara the way a person looks at someone they recognize from a dream they haven't quite remembered yet. Then she turned the library book around and showed Mara a tiny drawing she had made in the margin, a single flower, intricate and precise, growing out of cracked concrete. Neither of them said a word. Mara looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Delilah, and something inside the boarded-up house moved. Before you continue, if you believe in kindness and the power of human connection, if you think that love can find people even in the most unlikely places, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not alone in their struggles. Your support means more than you know. What grew between Mara and Delilah grew the way things grow in difficult soil, slowly, stubbornly, and with a kind of quiet insistence that refuses to be discouraged by circumstance. It was not dramatic in its early stages. It was a shared table at breakfast and a borrowed book and the small revolutionary act of remembering how the other person takes their coffee. It was Mara noticing that Delilah's shoulders dropped 2 inches when she talked about her daughter, and Delilah noticing that Mara's hands shook slightly every evening around the time the visiting hours ended, the time when people who had someone left were reminded of it, and people who didn't were reminded of that instead. They began to exist in each other's orbit with a naturalness that surprised them both, because nothing inside Westbrook was supposed to feel natural. The months turned. December brought institutional tinsel and a Christmas dinner that smelled better than it tasted, and on Christmas Eve Mara spent 3 weeks worth of commissary points on a small notepad and 2 proper pens, which she wrapped in a piece of paper she had colored with borrowed markers and slid under Delilah's cell door. Inside the notepad she had written one sentence in her careful, carpenter's handwriting. For all the flowers you still have left to draw. Delilah held that notepad against her chest for a long time. It was the first time in months she had felt seen by something other than a security camera. January was brutal. A facility lockdown following a fight in the East Wing kept them separated for 11 days. 11 days during which Mara understood with frightening clarity how much she had begun to depend on the sight of Delilah's face in the morning. When the lockdown ended and they found each other in the corridor, they didn't embrace that was not the kind of thing you could do safely inside those walls, but Delilah pressed her hand briefly against Mara's forearm, and that single touch traveled through Mara like electricity traveling through a structure that had forgotten it was wired for it. February brought a harder thing. Delilah received news from her sister on the outside that her daughter had been sick. Nothing fatal, nothing permanent, but the kind of sick that a mother should be present for and Delilah could not be. She unraveled quietly over the course of 3 days, and Mara held the fraying edges of her the only way she knew how. By staying close, by being consistent, by showing up to every meal and every yard hour and every quiet evening with the wordless message that she was not going anywhere. On the 4th night, when the facility had gone into its restless, half-sleeping state, Mara lay on her bunk and talked softly across the corridor for 2 hours, telling Delilah things she had never told anyone, about her woodworking shop, about the smell of pine shavings in winter, about the specific weight of a life poorly chosen, and a heart still trying to function inside that weight, and Delilah listened. That was all. She just listened in a way that made Mara feel like someone was finally reading the book of her, not skimming it. Spring arrived, and with it, something that neither woman had planned for and both had feared, the realization that what existed between them had grown past friendship into something that had its own heartbeat. It was terrifying. Love is always terrifying. But love inside a place designed to strip you of yourself carries its own particular brand of fear. There were eyes everywhere. There were rules about everything. There was the constant awareness that softness could be weaponized against you by people who needed someone to be softer than them. Mara lay awake for many nights wrestling with what she felt, not because she was ashamed of loving a woman, but because she was afraid of what loving anyone meant for a person who had spent 2 years convincing herself she didn't need to. She was afraid of what it would cost Delilah to be chosen by someone like her, someone still serving time not just in a cell, but inside her own regret. But Delilah had made her own calculations, and they came out differently. She had spent enough of her life making herself smaller to fit into spaces that were never built for her, and she had decided, somewhere between January's lockdown and March's first hesitant warmth, that she was done doing that. One afternoon in the garden, the dead garden which had, improbably, begun to show a thin thread of green along one edge, she took Mara's hand and held it. Just held it. Out in the open air, in the pale yellow light of an April afternoon, with all the complexity of their lives present in that single gesture, and Mara, who had boarded up every window and locked every door, felt the whole structure of her carefully maintained isolation begin, gently, to come apart. The remaining months of the year were not easy. Nothing about their lives was or would be easy, but they moved through them differently, with a kind of grounded tenderness that became the most quietly radical thing in that entire facility. They read the same books and argued about them. They learned each other's histories in fragments, the way you piece together a mosaic, understanding that some tiles are still missing and choosing to love the image anyway. Mara began to draw again. She had done it as a teenager and stopped, and now she filled the margins of her own notebook with careful sketches that Delilah studied, with the seriousness of someone reading scripture. Delilah taught Mara 3 songs she had learned from her grandmother, and Mara hummed them under her breath during work shifts, until the woman next to her asked what she was always so happy about, and Mara realized with genuine shock that she didn't have an immediately available answer because she was simply, inexplicably, in the middle of terrible circumstances, happy. On the last day of that year, day 365, counted from the November Tuesday when Delilah first arrived, and both women were called to a meeting with the facility counselor. Mara's appeal had moved forward. Delilah's early release for good behavior had been approved. They were not being released together. They were not being handed a simple ending. Life did not hand people like them simple endings, but they were being handed something, a future in which they would both be outside these walls, in the same world, on the same side of every locked door. They walked back from that meeting in silence, and when they reached the corridor where their cells sat across from each other, Delilah pulled out the notepad, the Christmas notepad, now nearly full, and she opened it to a page near the back where she had drawn, across 2 whole pages, a single enormous flower growing from a crack in a concrete floor. Beneath it she had written, "We grew anyway." Mara pressed her fingers to that page. 365 days, 1 year of stolen conversations, and shared silences and love built without the ordinary tools that people use to build it. 1 year of 2 women refusing to let the worst circumstances of their lives be the final word about who they were. In a place designed to reduce, they had added to each other. In a place designed to isolate, they had found something that isolation could not survive. If this story touched something in your heart, if it reminded you that love is not diminished by difficult places, that human beings carry extraordinary capacity for tenderness even in the hardest seasons of their lives, please leave a comment below. Tell us what part of Mara and Delilah's story moved you most. Your words become part of this community, and this community is built on the belief that every story of love deserves to be witnessed. Drop a in the comments if you believe that love can grow anywhere, even from cracked concrete, even in the most unexpected places, even between 2 people the world had already decided to forget. Mara and Delilah did not know what waited for them beyond those walls. They only knew what they had already proven, that a year of real love, of patient and stubborn and tender love, had made them more themselves than they had ever been. And sometimes, that is the only kind of hope worth holding on to. Not the promise of a perfect future, but the proof of what you are capable of becoming when someone chooses to truly see you. They had seen each other. In the end, that was everything.